wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. So, there's been a few questions and a few comments that I thought, instead of responding kind of piecemeal to each one, I would just make another quick little response video here. And that is to people who are saying, like, well, you know, some of the things that Linda has been talking about or advocating for, right? Certain political candidates that exude or display animosity either towards Muslims in particular or to maybe some other group of people, whether that be religious or ethnic, or some type of policy. They say, well, you know, what's wrong with that? Like in the example in the last video where she was talking about Ted Cruz. Well, what's wrong with that? Ted Cruz is a quote-unquote bad guy, right? He's somebody that has said disparaging things about the Muslim community and has used his position as a person who's involved in the legislative policy making and executing process, right? His involvement in government. We shouldn't vote for this guy, right? Now, if Linda had wanted to say, well, I don't think it's a good choice to vote for Ted Cruz based upon those things. Okay, there's no problem with at least putting that position out there. But when it is elevated to the point where you're going to question a person's Islam because they might vote, or unless they do not. So it was also the fact that unless you do not actively get out and not vote for Ted Cruz, then your Islam is going to be questioned. And so once again, this is very troubling that the secularization of the Muslim mind is that we are going to now hold each other accountable and assess and ascertain our respective practice of Islam, not based upon the legitimate parameters, right? But rather those according to a rubric and a system outside of Islam. And so when people are saying, well, what's the problem? I said, well, it's a highly inconsistent thought process, and that what she wants to have one thing good for the goose but not good for the gander, as we say. So for instance, what about politicians, particularly on the left, although we are starting to see them now on the so-called right as well, who are advocating for not only homosexuality, forget about that, right? But are now advocating for transgenderism, which as a policy seeks to abolish parental discretion and parental rights and parental jurisdiction over their children, and give children essentially autonomy to make decisions to either torture their bodies chemically, torture their souls psychologically, and yes, mutilate their genitals. And yet, when it comes to those things, they will say, well, we don't agree with homosexuality, but we're gonna essentially put that aside and vote on this. Well, what about somebody that says, theoretically, you know what? I don't like Ted Cruz's position on the Muslims, or I don't like Donald Trump's position on Mexican immigrants, but I am going to vote for him as my own lesser of two evils sort of process. Well, why is it that those who choose a different process of determining the lesser of two evils that happens to differ than Linda's, while both are essentially trying to use religion as a means of determining which is the greater and the lesser, but why is it only acceptable for Linda? And why is it only acceptable for those on the left? When you have Muslims that say, well, of course, I don't agree with the the racism, as if there isn't racism also amongst the left, right? Those of you that claim to be lovers of your brother, Malik Shabazz, aka Malcolm X, rahimahullah, perhaps you should go and actually read what Malcolm had to say about liberals, particularly white liberals. Putting that aside, why is that they're the only ones that can make this gambit? They're the only ones that are able to determine what is actually the lesser part of the so-called evil. And as a very good friend of mine said, whether it's left or right, Democrat, Republican, liberal, progressive, and conservative, they're all going to some extent, probably greater than lesser, they're all going to be astaghfirullah and a'udhu billah. They're all going to be, I seek Allah's forgiveness and I seek Allah's protection in terms of what they're advocating for. And so why is it acceptable for one group to say, well, in my estimation, I'm going to pick what I deem to be the lesser of two evils and pick this one party, and okay, you've done the same and you've come up with a different answer. The issue is essentially what Linda is saying is that there is no longer any process, that there is some sort of invisible habal, right? There's some sort of invisible rope or line between her and revelation, as if God is speaking to her directly, as if revelation is still ongoing, and that the process by which she is determining the lesser or the greater of good or evil is not a flawed human endeavor, but rather someone that is quasi-transcendent and revelatory. That's a big problem. And then to use that flawed process to determine it, and then to castigate those who happen to come up with a different answer than she does. Again, when we're seeing the secular, the sacralization of the profane, right? When we're seeing those things that are in their essence secular, bestowed and bastardized into a kind of sacredness through a very rogue interpretation of religion, and then passing this off as some sort of newfound orthodoxy of which those who differ than you can now be called into question. But when we call others into question, who don't pray, who don't fast, who don't attend the masjid on a regular basis, who shave their beards, who don't wear hijab, that have crazy ideas about the attributes of God, have insane ideas about talking to people in the grave and so on, right? When those people are labeled questionable, then we are labeled what? The extremists, the zealots, and the bigots. And so this is why it is such a problem, and why I've been trying to kind of turn this into a teaching moment for people to kind of wake up and it sounds good, right? It sounds good. And again, I'm not advocating for Ted Cruz or not against Ted Cruz. Only thing I have to say about Ted Cruz is he definitely looks better with a beard than without. I have nothing to say about Ted Cruz. But it is a very disturbing trend that Muslims are now going to hold other Muslims accountable for their political and secular affiliations, and yet not have at least the same level of commitment to holding Muslims accountable for their actual religious practices. So what they're saying is that religion is wide open for interpretation, but when it comes to politics, right, there is no ta'wil, there is no tafsir. It is hadha huwa. It is what? Al-abyad, al-aswad wal-abyad. It is a black and white affair. And in fact, while we do know that generally speaking, on the vast majority of issues, some aside, that in the religion itself, not everything is black and white. A few things are black and white, but a lot of things are not. And yet when it comes to politics, these high priests, these muftis, and these maulanas of secularism are telling Muslims in the name of religion that your political and secular affiliations must fall in line with the high priesthood. Otherwise, you will risk being excommunicated. And this is simply not only, untenable and unacceptable, it's also a clear sign of a juvenile mind, one that is both immature in its understanding of life and woefully ignorant of its understanding of religion, despite their claims to the contrary. So I wanted to continue, and inshallah I may continue to make some short videos commenting on this. Leave your questions, I will try to address them. Inshallah, it's 12:30, so I gotta go and open up the masjid for Jum'ah. Inshallah, may Allah Ta'ala bless you in this wonderful month of Shawwal. I encourage you all to take advantage of the 6 days of Shawwal to increase your standing with Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. May Allah Ta'ala accept from us. تقبل منا ومنكم وسائر المسلمين. جزاكم الله خيرا. والسلام عليكم.